one of the reasons that most people fail on diets is because of decision fatigue around food. If you are limiting your running intensity because you're worried about staying in the quote-unquote fat burning zone, you will burn less calories and you will be in a lower calorie deficit at the end of the day if that was the only constraint that we were looking at. The vast majority of people, unless you have specific medical conditions, do not need electrolytes. Because I don't want to look like you, but the reality is because I don't want the average outcome. I want to do something different, and that means that I'm going to have to make choices that other people won't make.
Why is losing fat still so overwhelming? We're bombarded with conflicting advice every single day. Keto, intermittent fasting, seed oils, cardio versus weights, calorie counting versus clean eating. The truth, fat loss isn't as complex as people make it out to be, but it is harder than it needs to be because of all the noise. Today on the Wellness Report, we're stripping away all the BS. Joining me is Emma Storey-Gordon, fitness coach, host of the ESG Fitness Podcast, and one of the most no-nonsense, evidence-based voices in health today. Emma, welcome. You've recently written a book called The Female Fat Loss Coach. Is there a difference in the way that men and women should lose fat?
So one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, and one of the reasons that I agreed to the title, which is a little bit clickbaity, is that there isn't a huge difference in the way that men and women lose fat or build muscle. And that's kind of what the start of the book talks about. There's almost like a marketing narrative and kind of like a pink tax that is put on women to convince us that we need something completely different to men. A lot of this stems from the fact that a lot of research has been done on men and very little comparatively been done on women. Now, that was probably true 50 years ago. Over the last kind of 50 years, we've bridged that gap a lot. And actually, most of what the research shows when we do compare men to women is that the same principles apply to lose fat, the same principles apply to build muscle. Where there might be slight nuances is more to do with women's emotion, women's hormone levels, not necessarily from a physiological level, more from the impact on mood, on motivation, on potentially sleep. There are small changes in your metabolism which actually don't make a huge physiological difference in terms of how you would lose fat or build muscle. So the short answer to that is men and women are more similar than they are different. A lot of people like to tell you something else in order to sell you something that is different. But the reality is, the research shows that we are very similar, and the way that you would build muscle and lose fat is also very similar.
I think that's useful then to know as we sort of now approach it holistically. If we talk about all of the main components to losing weight, that men and women are quite similar. So right, let's start this fat loss journey, Emma. I'm going to ask you about all the possible ways that people can try and make a change, and you, from your expertise, will give us the best advice possible, I'm sure. Let's start with nutrition, and that to me feels like the key thing here, right? Mm-hmm. And
yeah.
So, yeah, sorry. The one thing that I've come across your page is this constrained energy model. Can you explain what that is to me?
So interestingly that you fell on that, because it's not something I talk about a lot, but the idea behind this is essentially that there is a claim that just cutting calories won't work because of this constrained energy model. And kind of the idea behind it is that when you change one side of the energy balance equation, you change the other side as well, right? So say you just started burning more calories, actually you then start to kind of counteract that by burning less calories or by eating more, right? So if you increase your activity levels, often your hunger levels increase to compensate.
Yeah, so when I go for a run, in like a long run, and it's kind of like a harder run, I always feel hungrier.
Yeah, and actually this is quite an individual difference. So some people find that when they exercise more, when they increase their step count, depending on the type of exercise as well, they have this quite large compensatory increase in hunger. Other people don't really have that, nowhere near to the same extent. So those people tend to find it slightly easier to lose weight because when they do move more, they don't have this compensatory effect. Some people will find that when they move more, their hunger ramps up significantly, and thus it's much harder for them to actually stick to a calorie deficit.
Right.
So a lot of people will think, well, if I just burn 500 more calories a day, then obviously I would start losing weight. the reality is when a lot of people try that, it doesn't work. And this is kind of an explanation as to why. This happens on numerous levels. So there's a kind of a psychological level of, I've been for a run, so do you know what? I'll just get the bus into work instead of I would normally walk. Most people overestimate how many calories they expend doing exercise and underestimate how many calories they consume, and also underestimate how many calories they spend when they're just more active during the day.
Yeah.
The other thing that often happens is you subconsciously start to move less outside of exercise when you've exercised. So that's known as your NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And you might fidget a little bit less. You might decide not to walk to the further away bathroom or to get off the tube a little bit earlier. Often it's not like I've been for a run, so I'm not going to do this. It's more of I'm a little bit tired. And you almost don't even notice that you're making these small changes, which over the day actually do tend to add up. And then what's probably the biggest impact is the impact on hunger. And even, again, sometimes subconsciously, sometimes consciously, of like, we don't really realize how many calories are in things. So you might be like, I've been for a run, I'm going to get a large latte instead of a small one.
Yeah.
Not realizing that you've actually just consumed the vast majority of the calories that you just expended in the run. But in your head, you're also like at lunchtime having a slightly bigger portion because you went for a run that morning or you did a workout. And so often it's just these little changes that mean that you think you might be in a deficit, but you're not.
Right. Another thing that I came across on your page in talking about food was this 3-to-1 method. Would you be able to just go into that at all?
So this is a method I actually came up with myself, and I spoke about it for years with my clients, and nobody really picked up on it. This is quite an interesting psychology until I named it.
Right.
So the reason behind this is actually that one of the reasons that most people fail on diets is because of decision fatigue around food. Now, on the one end of the spectrum, which used to be what most people did, you have very strict meal plans, which people tend to stick to for a couple of days to a couple of weeks. Then they find it restrictive. They can't eat with their family. They can't eat socially. They get bored of the same meals, and then they end up giving up, and it feels all over restrictive. On the other end of the spectrum, you have, here's some calorie targets. Just eat whatever you want within those calorie targets. When people are just tracking calories, often what happens is they have to make so many decisions around food that they get decision fatigue, and they start making poorer decisions around food, especially like later on in the day when you've kind of, your willpower has reduced over the day, or you're tired, or you've had other important decisions to make throughout the day, and then you get worse and worse decisions. So the way that the 3-to-1 method works is you have 4 meals a day. 3 of those are already structured. So you're going to have essentially the same or very similar breakfast, lunch, and snack during the day. I set these up with clients so I know they've hit their protein target, their fruit and veg target, they're getting in enough fiber, and they're getting some healthy fats in there. And I keep them relatively low calories. Then in the evening, which tends to be a more social meal, you have a lot more flexibility. So I just give them a calorie range that I know is going to be in line with their goals, whether that's fat loss or maintenance or building muscle, for example. That method isn't anything that's like crazy or different from a physiological level. If you're losing fat, it's still because you've consistently stuck to a calorie deficit. I'm not saying this is uniquely ramping your metabolism or making any crazy claims. The reason it works so well is it takes the decision fatigue away from food choices.
Sure.
And really the reason that people struggle with their diet is consistently sticking to something long enough without feeling restricted. And this is a nice balance between the two. The reality is you do need some structure. You do need some constraints around your food choices. Otherwise, most people will naturally overeat, right? That's why the average person is overweight, because in our environment, that's the preset, is if you don't make a conscious decision to, make choices in line with your goals, then you will probably become overweight because of the environment that we live in.
I think that completely resonates with experience for me is, on the times or on the occasions or the weeks where I've completely planned out my meals, then I'm way more likely to stick to, eating a certain number of calories compared to when I'm just freewheeling and I come in and like, I'm not sure I'm going to have for dinner tonight. And then I'm snacking around the fridge and then I'm going out to buy dinner after that. So, it makes complete sense. Protein's another hugely, hot topic and how much you should eat. What about the people that don't necessarily want to become bigger? How important is protein for them?
So protein is important for everyone, whether you have a fat loss goal or a maintenance goal, or even if you're not interested in building muscle, it's still important, potentially from like a society perspective. But it also even helps, and I think people kind of forget the other benefits of it, but all adaptations to exercise, whether they're muscle building or endurance, require protein. Even your skin, like elasticity, also requires protein. Um, and then the other thing is it also helps manage glucose levels to have higher protein meals. So there are numerous benefits to having protein. What's interesting about this is most people, so the lay person, probably needs to eat more protein. But the already interested in fitness person is often actually aiming for slightly too much protein. And there is this kind of law of diminishing returns when it comes to protein, where if you're getting like 20 to 30 grams a meal, great. You've probably mostly saturated the benefit of that. Sometimes people will just have this notion in their head that more is better. They're like, oh, well, if 20 grams is good, 40 grams must be doubly as good. That's not the case. And actually, at some point, especially if, for example, you're a woman who wants to either maintain or lose weight, you are now impacting the rest of your food choices by your high protein diet, right? Because you only have so many calories to play with. If you're like, oh, I need to get in, I don't know, 160 grams of protein within this, that's going to impact how much fat you can get in, how much carbs you can get in, and then your food choices outside of that. So there is a point of like, get enough protein in. You don't need more and more and more and more.
Yeah. We should talk about alcohol, and just for the viewer to know, I was at a wedding last night, so I'm quite hungover and drank quite a lot. The time that in my life that I was at my sort of best shape and my fittest was during COVID, and that's because I'm a social drinker, so I was barely drinking, and I noticed huge differences in my body during COVID, and not that I'm like in bad shape now, but nowhere near where I was, and I think that mostly comes down to drinking like most weekends, basically. Well, every weekend, let's be honest. So that's my honest assessment. What's your take, Emma? How does alcohol fit into someone that wants to get in good shape and lose fat?
So you absolutely can drink alcohol, right? As long as it's within your calories, as long as it's not in excess. And again, the same principle applies of like if you're using a lot of your calories for alcohol, and realistically those calories aren't particularly healthy calories, and they also have an impact on how well you recover from exercise. They also, let's be real, have an impact on your food choices. You're much more likely to make poorer food choices when you're drunk or when you're hungover. So it is harder if you're someone who's drinking a lot, especially to excess. And then I think everyone should kind of question a little bit their relationship with alcohol and how much it's bringing them and how much of it is actually just wrapped up in a social occasion. So would it actually have made that much difference, for example, if you still went to the pub with your mates, but you only had one beer and then you had three non-alcoholic beers? Like, how much of a difference would that actually make to you? And could you do that most weekends, and then still have the odd occasion where you're like, yeah, I am going to drink to excess if you want to do that? I think another just really interesting thing, and we spoke about this briefly before we started recording, is just the social norms around alcohol in the UK, which is that, so I don't drink, and now that's becoming quite normal, and I live in London, so it's kind of normal for people not to drink. There's a lot of like, my mates don't drink and no one really questions it that much. When I lived in Scotland, it was really weird, and it was like, oh, you don't drink, why? Like, are you an alcoholic? Like, is there a specific reason you don't drink? And it's a strange thing to think about, because at the end of the day, alcohol is a drug. And now you're asking people, like, it is weird. You're the weird one if you don't want to take the drug, right? Like, you're the weird one if you're like, I actually don't want to make myself feel shit tomorrow. And I have to now explain myself as to why that is. To me, there's only a downside to alcohol. Like, and that's not me being judgmental. I genuinely don't care if anyone else drinks. I don't care if people drink around me. It's completely up to them. For me personally, there is no upside and only a downside. So I don't want to make that choice. Now, I know myself well enough and I'm confident in myself well enough that no one could peer pressure me into drinking now. because I simply don't care. I have no interest in, living up to any expectations or, anything around that. But I do know that, say, for example, for you, that might be quite hard because all your mates drink. They're used to you drinking. That is part of like their experience of you. So if you suddenly flipped and you were like, I'm not drinking, that would be a harder shift to make. But I think everyone should spend a period of time not drinking and then decide if they want to add it in or not. This is why I quite like the like dry January or sober October or something. Just to be like, okay, for 30 days I'm not going to drink, to prove to myself that I can go out, enjoy myself and not drink. And then I'm going to decide, like, do I want to have this in my life or not? The other thing is it's so expensive. Like a pint in London is like £8, £9 a lot of the time, right? That's a huge expense. And you think even if you were just saving that money, but you're also saving calories, you're improving your mood, you're improving your energy levels, you probably have less arguments with your partner. Like, there's a lot of benefits that come from not drinking or at least drinking less. But I just do think that, especially in Britain, we have this culture of not just, oh, let's have a nice glass of wine on a Friday, but like, let's sink 3 bottles of wine and
Yeah.
feel crap the next day. We don't really have like an off switch.
And I guess also, if you're drinking that much, you're probably not realistically counting every calorie either, are you?
No, not at all. And I think even as someone who, I am aware of the calories that are in, say, a glass of wine or a pint of beer or something. Even when you know that, it's quite hard to get your head around it because I'm like, oh, but it's
Yeah.
just, it's liquid. Do you know what I mean? You're like,
Yeah, we're all guilty of that, It's like we count them as slightly less calories than, a meal because it's not like a proper food going
yeah,
into
and even when you kind of think back on your day, like for example, I will often, again, even though this is my job and I know this stuff, I'm like, oh yeah, no, this is what I had for lunch, this is what I had for breakfast, probably about that. And then it's like, yeah, but you also had a coffee, like an oat latte,
Yeah,
which is another 200 odd calories. Like, oh, you just kind of forgotten about that. And then maybe you had, another drink at some point. It's very easy to just like forget the things that don't in your head register as eating a meal.
it's interesting you said that because I was going to ask you about that, about like though coffee, but you're on your Instagram, you're quite telling people to not feel guilty about those small details, about those like lattes and whatever they're putting in it. So that's slightly at odds to what you said there, but I guess if
Well,
you're
so
not
not
drinking,
really. So the discussion I think I was having on Instagram is people get really specific about like, oh my God, you're having oat milk in your coffee versus normal milk, and
Yeah.
like that has more additives in it, and
Right.
that must be the big impact. It's not the one coffee that you're having, let's be real. I just mean like things like that, especially
Yeah.
liquid calories, can add up and you don't quite register them. And then you realize, oh, that's what's pushing me out of my deficit. What I wouldn't be worried about is like, if you're like, I love, I don't know, oat milk lattes because they taste so much nicer, I wouldn't overstress about that just because they might have, some extra sweeteners in or a few additives in compared to cow's milk. That's not what's going to have the big impact on your health. And the same argument is true for ultra processed foods. People get ridiculously fixated on like that one sweetener in that one drink that you're having or the one chocolate bar or something, as opposed to looking at the diet as a whole and being like, right, well, the reason that you're gaining weight isn't because you're sometimes having sweeteners, it's
Yeah.
because you're eating in excess consistently, and that's why that excess energy is being stored. And actually now and again some ultra processed foods within your generally whole food diet isn't the end of the world, and it will probably cause you more stress to try and cut out every single thing that could possibly be deemed ultra processed. There's also numerous layers to how stupid that argument is, because a lot of the time ultra processed foods, they're kind of labeled in a way that doesn't really mean anything about the nutritional quality of them, right? So as an example, a donut is an ultra processed food. You kind of expect that. So is a yogurt. But you might be like, oh, you know what, like a yogurt's quite good. And I'd
Yeah.
be like, yeah, that's probably quite a good thing to include. And it might be quite satiating and it's got high protein in it and there's some dairy in there as well. And like that, great. But you're putting them in the same thing, right? So I think labeling foods just by their processing,
Yeah, amounts.
like it just
Yeah.
categorizing them that way doesn't actually show the impact.
Just quickly on that coffee thing, though, there are like a lot of people like have the full syrup and like caramel latte and all that, and I feel that those are almost it's got as many calories as half a meal. Something.
Oh, wholemeal, some of them, yeah. Like I think if you get like a big frappe thing from Starbucks or something, like yeah, that's like the equivalent of a meal. So I do think if fat loss is your goal, you need to be considering not just your calories, but what you eat within those calories, because that's what's going to allow you to stick to your calories, right? And I have a resource that I go through on this, which is like 10 evidence-based principles to increasing hunger. And it's things like avoiding liquid calories, looking at the standard things like protein, but food volume is massively underrated. And if you look at, for example, 200 calories worth of a Mars bar versus 200 calories worth of a big chicken salad, what do you think is going to fill you up more? Obviously, the chicken salad, right? And also it stretches your stomach, which releases satiety hormones. And there are numerous impacts on these things. And I think a lot of the time I work with women or who come to me initially and they're like, I'm trying to stick to what might seem like a sensible deficit for them. Let's say it's 1800 calories, but I'm just so hungry all the time. Is my calorie target wrong, or do I just lack willpower? And I look at what they're eating within that, and I'm like, you spent 500 calories on, half a muffin at Starbucks and a coffee. Like, that's not a good use of those calories if you're trying to be satiated. I'm not demonizing those food. Like, have them, but understand that like the foods that you consume will have a consequence on how satiated you feel. And every now and again, fine, include them, but it wouldn't be something that I'd be putting in consistently and expecting to then feel
Yeah.
satiated afterwards.
We talk a lot about metabolism, don't we? And a lot of people sort of talk about how they can affect their metabolism. Is that possible? Can we change our metabolism?
Yes, to an extent. I think you put in the question to me, which I quite liked, was like, can you fix your metabolism?
Can you affect it, basically? Yeah.
Yeah, and like my answer would be most people are telling you that your metabolism isn't broken. Like nobody's metabolism is broken. Your metabolism is largely dictated by your total body mass. So where people go wrong quite a lot is kind of two myths. One is that like you can just have a slow metabolism. That's not the case. And if you are a larger person, you will actually have technically a faster metabolism, right? So someone who weighs 100 kilograms versus someone who weighs 60 kilograms, the 100 kilogram person will have a higher basal metabolic rate, which means they will burn more calories just at rest to maintain their body mass. So that's one myth that people have, that they think, oh, I'm overweight because I have a slow metabolism. No, you almost definitely have a higher metabolism than someone who is lighter than you. Below that, the next myth that comes up quite a lot is your metabolism slows as you age. We actually have really interesting data on this, that your metabolism stays unbelievably consistent throughout your life until about 70. And that's because you do tend to see a lot of muscle mass loss beyond 70 because people become much less active. And so you do see quite a decline, but that decline is completely related to and explained by the reduction in your muscle mass. So you have two things: total body mass, and then to a smaller extent, how much of that body mass is muscle mass, because your muscle is a more metabolically active tissue than your fat, for example. So if you have more muscle and less fat, then for the same given weight, you would have a faster metabolism. But there's nothing that you would need to do to quote unquote reset your metabolism. You see this online quite a lot, that things like very low calorie diets will ruin your metabolism. That's not true. That's completely incorrect. The only reason that low calorie diets would reduce your metabolism is because they worked, you lost fat, and you became a smaller person. And thus you now have less body mass, and thus you expend less calories. So it's kind of like you can't have one without the other. Like if you have successful fat loss, your metabolism will be slower, 100%. Like if you lose a significant amount of weight, your resting metabolic rate will be lower because there's less mass to maintain.
Yeah. So let's kind of move into exercise then from nutrition. The first thing I want to ask is about lifting weights, because this is something that I see online all the time about, like, obviously lifting weights is very good for fat loss, but like is 3 times a week? Is that the minimum you should be lifting weights?
So, lifting weights is not good for fat loss.
Okay, I'm wrong already. Apologies.
Yes. And this is
Good.
just a little caveat. That's because I'm like, a lot of people are like, what's the best exercise for fat
Yeah.
loss? And I wouldn't even be considering it in my choice of exercise. Lifting weights is great for building muscle. It's great for maintaining muscle when you're in a calorie deficit. It's great for your health for numerous reasons. It's great for bone mineral density and exercise in general, especially if you're also mixing in like cardiovascular exercise, is just generally good for your health and your all-cause mortality, right? Total risk of dying from any disease. So it is so unbelievably important for your health. The impact on fat loss is way smaller than most people think. So what I'd be focusing on for fat loss is creating a calorie deficit, which means moving more, probably outside of exercise. So this is why so many people talk about step count. So trying to move more habitually, and then your diet. That's what you should focus on when you're looking at fat loss. When you're looking at building muscle or maintaining muscle or health, then I'd be looking at exercise for that. But I think where people go wrong is if I was solely prescribing you exercise for fat loss, I would probably give you moderate intensity endurance type exercise that you could burn the most calories for in the time period that you had to exercise. That would be quote unquote optimal, but that is never what I would program for a client because that's not what's going to get them the best results. So in terms of like does lifting weights help you burn fat? No, but it helps you improve your body composition and your health. And yes, to your question, like 3 times a week is a really good point to start. But if you're doing nothing, then once a week is a great place to start. Like doing anything, going from 0 to 1 is like the most important thing. But if you're looking for something to work towards or aim towards, then 3 times a week is great, especially if you can do it like Monday, Wednesday, Friday or something, and you're splitting it up throughout the week.
So when you get a new client, would you, how quickly do you get them working in a gym or lifting weights? If it depends, I guess it depends on the client, obviously.
Yeah,
but
like a lot of my clients are already lifting weights and in the gym.
Right.
Some of them are like completely starting from 0.
Yeah.
And they might even feel more comfortable working out at home for a period of time, or just getting their steps in first and doing a few bodyweight exercises, and then we slowly increase things from there.
But they will always eventually start lifting weights.
Ideally, yes, unless there's a specific reason not to, like injury or something.
Yeah.
But I just think it's interesting because some people are just like, oh, I don't mind going for a run, but weights aren't really for me. And I almost see it like brushing your teeth. Like, I don't really care if you like it or not. If you don't like lifting weights, what I will do is give you minimal effective dose workouts, right? So they'll be shorter, sharper. You might only, go in twice a week as a bit of a compromise or something. But it's still unbelievably important to your health. So I think to miss it out would be stupid. But it like I said, it doesn't really matter if you particularly like it or not. You should still be doing it.
Yeah. You mentioned length of workout there. What, ideally, how long should people's workouts be? Across all exercise, that is, I guess.
It does depend on the outcome that you want, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not going to bullshit people that you could build optimal muscle mass in just 15-minute workouts. But like I said before, if you're going from doing nothing to something, then, anything counts. I actually quite like, in my own workouts now, about 20 minutes.
Yeah, I saw that on your Instagram page, actually. That is, people will love to hear that, right?
Yeah, I mean, the only caveat to that is I do them more frequently. And one of the reasons I like to train like that is because of the big mood and concentration enhancing effects of exercise. Right. So I like to work out every day because it helps me concentrate and it means I show up better and it improves my mood. But if I did now a long workout every day, 1, I don't want to spend that much time in the gym. And 2, I probably wouldn't recover that well. So it's a slightly different way to program things. But I also think people need to think about their goals and what's needed for that goal. Because a lot of my clients are like, I don't want to be a bodybuilder. I don't want to run a marathon. I just want to be fit and healthy and live my life, right? They don't need to spend hours and hours in the gym.
No.
They don't need to be, pushing themselves. They don't need to be in there every single day. They can get great results from doing 3 20 to 30-minute workouts a week.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about running as well. I'm a keen runner. I love to run like a 5K quite frequently, but sometimes I feel like it's not necessarily the best thing for the goals that I want to achieve. What is your advice around running? Should we be running slower? Should we be doing longer, slower runs rather than trying to go hell for leather?
It does depend on your goals, but this came up quite recently because there was someone with a very big account who's on like national TV who
I can think of the person
yeah,
already.
who shared some like misinformation around running, which I
Yeah,
think is the reason so I call out a lot of misinformation, and normally I will name the names of people who share it because normally I think they know better and they're trying to manipulate people into buying something. So
yeah.
often buy my supplement or buy my plan or something, right? This person isn't in the fitness industry, and I think it was like a genuinely I don't know,
Oh,
but
maybe I've got the
unfortunately
wrong person then.
oh, right, okay, probably, yeah. Like, I think it was genuine, like, this has helped me and I want to share it. I don't know that it's misinformation, but unfortunately, she shared it to millions of people. So, this was about the quote unquote fat burning zone. And to be clear, she probably heard it from some crap PT. And, like, why would you not believe that when you're not in the fitness industry? It's not your background. So, the idea behind this is that if you run at a lower intensity, you will burn more fat for fuel when you're running, which sounds good, right? So like that is true. That is fact. If you run at a lower intensity, you will utilize more fat for fuel and less carbohydrate for fuel while you're running. But that does not translate to losing more body fat. The only thing that would translate to losing more body fat is if you were in a bigger calorie deficit at the end of the day. Now, all things being equal, if you are limiting your running intensity because you're worried about staying in the quote unquote fat burning zone, you will burn less calories and you will be in a lower calorie deficit at the end of the day if that was the only constraint that we were looking at. So it's a completely stupid idea to limit your exercise intensity to stay in this fat burning zone because there's literally no benefit to doing it. If anything, you're going to have worse fitness outcomes because you've run slower and you're going to burn less calories, right? So there's not really any benefit to doing that. I think where people get confused is they hear burn more fat and they think that must be a good thing because I want to lose fat. When actually it's someone who's completely misunderstood like short-term utilization of fuel versus body fat loss. And the reason that we use more fat for fuel at lower intensities is because it's much quicker to, well, breaking down fat is actually quite slow and it requires oxygen. It's much quicker to break down carbohydrate for fuel. So when you are exercising at higher intensity and you need energy quicker, and sometimes in those moments you don't have enough oxygen in your muscles, you can break down carbohydrates, what's known as anaerobically, without oxygen, and thus you can still keep exercise intensity going, but you will be utilizing more carbohydrates. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. You will have burnt more calories too. It doesn't really matter what fuel you're using at certain times. But you often hear a kind of similar argument for low carb diets, right? They're like, if you go low carb, you'll burn more fat for fuel. And it's like, yeah, no shit. Like, because you've put more fat in your body as a replacement for carbs, you will burn more fat. It's kind of like thinking if you put wood on a fire, it's going to burn wood. If you put coal on a fire, it's going to burn coal. If you put more fat in your diet, you're going to burn more fat. If you put more carbohydrate in your diet, you're going to burn more carbohydrate. It doesn't matter because it's the calorie deficit that's going to cause fat loss. So if you want to have a slightly higher carb diet or a slightly lower carb diet, that should be based more on individual preference if your end goal is fat loss than worrying about fuel utilization.
But could you make the argument then that if you ran slower on your run, that you'd be less hungry at the end of it? Is that true?
Not necessarily, and actually sometimes the opposite happens. So
Okay.
I don't know if you've found this, but if you do a more intense run, often appetite is actually suppressed afterwards.
Yes, it is for a bit, but then I think it comes back round within like an hour or so.
Yeah, it does. It will come back round,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
part
yeah.
of that's like lactate buildup. But when you go on a slower run, often like you could eat straight away afterwards,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
There isn't a huge. In fact, the research, and this is surprising to most people, actually shows that moderate exercise actually suppresses appetite. And what's interesting is that if you go from being very inactive to like what we would deem like kind of normal-ish activity levels, right? So let's say from doing only 4,000 steps a day to like 10,000 steps a day, this tends to regulate hunger. If you go from doing 10,000 steps a day to 16,000 steps a day, so it's the same 6,000 step increase, this tends to dysregulate hunger. So it's kind of like you want to avoid extremes. I don't think for most people, like a 5K run is going to massively ramp up their hunger levels, unless you're like, I'm already doing 16,000 steps a day and now I'm going to add on a 5K run. Yeah, that probably is going to push you to that extreme level. The hard part is there's no like hard and fast rule around this of do this many steps, because everybody's slightly different and everyone responds in a slightly different way. And some of this might actually even be genetic. So we know that if people have certain gene variants, they're more predisposed to being overweight. And part of that is your hunger response based on activity levels. So like how well do you essentially compensate for the energy expenditure? What's interesting is this probably used to be a really beneficial survival mechanism for humans, because normally actually what humans are trying to do is avoid starvation, right? Like, and when I say normally, I mean like over the last thousands of years, the likelihood is we were going to die because we didn't have enough energy stores. Now we have literally the opposite situation based on the environment that we live in, but obviously our genetics haven't caught up. So there are some people who are much better at defending their energy stores than other people. And I think explaining this stuff is quite useful because it takes a lot of the shame away. Like, it's not willpower, it's not that you're a greedy person. It could genuinely be that your hunger levels are higher. And thus that's why it's harder for you to lose weight than for your partner to lose weight or for your friend to lose weight, even though you're trying to do the same thing. You know, it's not a moral failing.
Yeah, great. It makes me feel better. I'm conscious that we're slightly running out of time here, Emma, but I mean, there's like a few things that I did want to touch on.
Yeah,
So let's talk about lifestyle. Sleep is a huge thing, isn't it? And it's such an important part of how people maintain and lose weight, right? Are there misconceptions though?
I think what's hard about sleep, and I talk about this a lot, and often it is like a huge contributing factor to like why people overeat. And you see this even with one night's poor sleep, hunger levels increase and it makes it harder for you to stick to your diet. Even if you think about like your mood after a poor night's sleep or how likely you are to go to the gym, it's like all of these things do have like knock-on effects. The reason that I am careful with the way that I talk about it is that there are a certain subset of people who just don't focus on their sleep enough, right? And that they could probably make more of an effort to get to bed a little bit earlier, stop scrolling on their phones, fine. There's also a huge subset of people who have young kids and it's not like they're purposely not sleeping. It's like, I don't really have a choice around this. And now hearing all this is adding even more stress, because now I'm, like even stressed about the fact that I'm not sleeping and the impact it's having on my metabolism or the impact it's having on my hunger levels, et cetera, et cetera. So all those people that, a lot of my clients are perimenopausal and they're waking up with hot flushes throughout the night or just like impacted sleep or insomnia. And that just adds even more stress to the fact that they're not sleeping. So I do think it's a case of like, do what you realistically can. Know that it is important. If you do have more control over it than somebody else, then I would be actively looking at sleeping more. And it is a weird concept, but a lot of the time, like an extra hour's sleep will probably have a bigger impact on your body composition than doing the extra workout.
Yeah, okay. Now, obviously, you work with a lot of women. What about hormones and stress? I mean, stress is common for everyone, but like hormones, how do they affect fat loss?
Hormones can affect fat loss, but not directly. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, it's my hormones that are stopping me lose weight. Your hormones won't stop you losing weight if you are in a calorie deficit. What your hormones can do is make it harder for you to stick to that deficit. So that might be things like impacting your mood, impacting your sleep, impacting your recovery, impacting your hunger levels, but it's not a direct impact. That doesn't mean that it's not very, very real, right? And often, even acutely, things like the week before most women's menstrual cycle, they will weigh slightly more. that can have a real, like, I don't know if I can swear on this, but
You can.
okay, I was going to say like head with the scales, because people are like, I'm trying really, really hard. And now this week, where I'm most illogical, where I have the worst body image, where I have PMS symptoms, where I've not slept well, where I'm more hungry, the scales have gone up. That's a really hard week to deal with. And I often think it's more to do with that than like specifically the hormones impacting. During perimenopause, it's slightly different because we do see much bigger fluctuations in hormones, much bigger fluctuations in mood, many other symptoms that can make it significantly harder for you to stick to your diet and exercise. But again, it's the same principle. It's not the hormones that's stopping you lose weight. It's how they're impacting your mood and your behaviors, and how that's impacting your energy balance, and that's impacting your weight.
Let's just quickly come on to some mantras then that you think that you live by, basically. Is there any real great advice that you want to give people?
Mantras in particular, I live by one which is imperfect action. And that's kind of like, do the best you can every day. And that will look different every day. And it's never going to be perfect.
I love that, because I always at work live by, like, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good.
Yeah. Like, get
Same
something out there. Like, if you can't do an hour's workout, do 20 minutes. If you can't do 20 minutes, do 10. Do something. You know, if you can't get your 10,000 steps, still try and get an extra 1,000 steps from where you are. Don't just think, oh, well, I can't hit that, then I'll just give up. Or if you've gone over your calories, okay, you've only gone over it by 100. You've not blown everything. You're probably still in a deficit, actually. Like, you know, just understanding that things won't be perfect, that life is never going to be perfect.
Yeah.
And that actually, to get results, you don't even need to be anywhere near perfect. I would say almost nothing I've ever done is anywhere near perfect. And so you lean into that, like, I'm going to take action no matter what. What's the next best choice I could make? How do I take some imperfect action? And then the other one I live by, which is a little bit more tough love, is like, I have like this thing where I'm like, have a average mindset. And I think one of the reasons that I push this so much is because when you look at average in the UK, there are many things that I'm passionate about outside of health and fitness, but you have people that are unhappy in their careers mostly, they're overweight, they're underslept, they're usually stressed, they're usually quite negative, and most people don't have savings or investments, right? Do you want to be, and also add on to that, most marriages end in divorce, right? So most relationships aren't good either. Do you want to be average? The likelihood is like, no, I don't want that average lifestyle. I don't want those average results. Yet we're all so accustomed to falling into social norms, which means that if you do that and you live like the average person and you make average choices, you will have an average life, because that's what you're going to fall into. So you have to actively make a choice to not be average, right? If you're like, right, most people are overweight, let's look at what most people do. They just, you know, grab a bacon roll on the way to work, and then they have a meal deal, and then they're going to get an iced latte, and then they're going to do, you know, and all this also contributes to the reason that so many people don't have savings, because you've also just blown like 20 quid there on stuff that actually you didn't need. You could have done it for half the price if you'd had a little bit of prep time. You don't need a lot of money to start saving and investing. It's just that you need to be more intentional. And I think if everyone was a bit more intentional with their choices, and actually I'm going to take that back, not everyone. If you're happy being average, continue being average. Like, and I always want this to come across like, this is not a judgment on anyone else. Like, I don't care what anybody else does. For me, I don't want the average life, right? Which does mean you will have to make choices that other people won't make, and you will probably stand out for that, and you have to accept that, and that's fine. Like, someone will turn around and be like, oh, why have you brought your own lunch to work? Cool. Like, you're obviously not going to say to them, because I don't want to look like you. But like, the reality is, like, because I don't want the average outcome. I want to do something different. And that means that I'm going to have to make choices that other people won't make. And once you lean into that and accept it, and even in your head, it becomes a bit like motivation of like, you know what, the average person on a rainy day wouldn't go out and get their steps in. But I don't want the average outcome, so I'm going to do that. Or like, you know what, the average person wouldn't go just do the 15-minute workout because they can't get in the gym for an hour. I'm going to do that because I don't want to be average. And you're even looking at like your presets, your social norms, like what most people would do and maybe what previous you would do. And you're like, I'm just going to do a little bit more than that in an imperfect way. And that's what's going to push you above.
I think most good outcomes require hard work, don't they? And so, as you say, it's all about being intentional. We are basically at the end. I did really quickly just want to talk to you about supplements. I'm not going to ask you about everything, but just is there one specifically, or like anything specifically that you want to warn people about that doesn't have the effect that they think it does?
Oh, can I have two?
Yeah, go on, of course.
Okay, so only because these are really big at the moment, but electrolytes.
Yes, which my girlfriend drinks like every day.
The vast majority of people, unless you have specific medical conditions, do not need electrolytes.
Yeah.
And I would argue it is actively bad for your health because most of us are already consuming too much salt. So you don't want to be consuming electrolytes. They're also very expensive. So I would stop.
Well, I think she seems to get them for free from work, but maybe that's, I don't know why they're giving them out. But
Well, I mean, I know why. Like, it's one of the best supplement companies to own because the profit margin is unbelievable because you're selling salty water, which costs so little to produce.
Yeah, you're right.
You have now huge profit margins that you can pump back into marketing, which is why they're everywhere. Anyway, definitely not needed for the vast majority of people. The second one is collagen, which again is massively marketed, and there's really no evidence that it's going to be beneficial if you are already consuming enough protein. And if you're not consuming enough protein, a better option would be to consume enough protein. When you consume enough protein, your body will synthesize collagen when needed.
Yeah.
And that's all you need to do.
Okay. I feel like we could do an entire video on supplements. Maybe we'll come back and do that at some point.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my thing is debunking supplements, and my main thing, and it's kind of like a weird cycle that I now like people to go through, is I will help them stop taking supplements that they don't need, save a ton of money, and then encourage them to, and by the way, I make no money doing this or anything, but encourage them to then start learning about investing that money. Because if you started investing the £50 a month that you're going to save not buying supplements that you don't need, in 10 years' time, you will look back and you'll be like, I am so glad that I started following ESG Fitness and followed this advice. Like, that is going to be a life-changing amount of money because of just £50 a month that you would have literally pissed down the toilet.
Emma, can you just remind people of when your book's out and what it's called?
The book is called The Female Fat Loss Coach. It is out on the 10th of September, I want to say.
We'll say September.
It is now available for pre-sale, which I didn't know about, but apparently is the most important part. So if you're even thinking about buying it and you want some good karma, which I will send your way, please buy it on pre-sale because apparently that's the most important thing. And if you do have any questions for me, specifically if you're like, I'm taking a load of supplements, I don't know if I should be taking these and I don't want to waste my money on them, head over to ESG Fitness on Instagram and tell me what you're taking and I will see if it's useful.
It's a good account. I've been browsing for the last few days and getting a lot of good advice myself. So,
thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Emma.
All right, thanks.